All right, hello and welcome to Edgewood College's virtual executive speaker series, Women's Leadership During the COVID-19 Crisis. We are so glad you are here. I am Laura Katoy. I am the Director of Graduate Programs at Edgewood College, and I have the pleasure of introducing our panel facilitator today, Dr. Sergent. Dr. Sergent is an assistant professor at Edgewood College and teaches in our business undergraduate and graduate programs. Should you be interested in the suite of business degrees from accounting, MBA to our leadership programs here at Edgewood, please feel free to visit our website. Dr. Sergent's work, Women's Leadership, is associated with fewer deaths during the COVID-19 crisis, quantitative and qualitative analysis of United States governors, was published in Journal of Applied Psychology, was featured by WebMD Newsbrief, Wisconsin Public Radio, SidePost News, University of Wisconsin-Madison National News, Wisconsin School of Business, UW-Madison Research Newsletter, and the Fisher College of Business Lead Read Today. And now I am able to turn it over to Dr. Sergent, who will introduce today's panel.
Thanks, Laura. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. So before we start, I want to get us a little bit engaged. So you should all have access to the chat feature here in WebEx events. So to break the ice and get everyone involved, I would like you to take about 15 seconds and in the chat, tell us what is leadership. Okay, so it's been inspiring. Inspiring seems to be a theme, inspiring others, motivating, closing a gap between a desired state and current state, helping your team, being a role model, speaking out, influencing. Excellent. Servant leadership, yep. Ability to make decisions, working and inspiring others, absolutely. Okay, absolutely. So this gives us a foundation. So now in the next 10 seconds, I want us to share with each other some characteristics that we think women leaders may have that might make them more effective than men in a crisis. So just what you think might contribute to effective women's leadership in a crisis. Take about 10 seconds here, and let's share those in the chat as well. Empathy, compassion, fact-based, active listening, compassion, understanding, listening, ability to multitask, sensitivity, vulnerability. Excellent. Diversity, yes. Authentic, yes, Susan. Excellent. Well, so what does this exercise do? Well, the leadership definition that we started with really demonstrates that if you ask 20 people, what does leadership mean? You're bound to get about 21 different answers, which is why we study the topic, because it's not straightforward. But we do all believe that it matters, or at least most of us believe that leadership matters. So we need to systematically figure out what makes a leader versus an ineffective leader. Some people may draw on their experience, which is great. Others might learn vicariously through leaders. But there is another angle through which we can look at leadership, and that's to say, what can we actually show with the scientific method? Now, that's not saying experience or vicarious learning or science is better or worse, but they're all different angles from which we can approach leadership. So this is why we're here today. I'm going to share with you some of the research, and we have a very experienced panel here to share with us some of the practice. Hopefully we bounce ideas off of each other, we get some nuggets, and we all leave feeling a little bit more confident about our own leadership skills. So I'm just going to briefly introduce the panel before I share with you a little bit more about the study. So we have Dr. Victoria Palmisano, who is our dean in the business school. So she's coming from the domain of higher education. We have Kelda Roys, who just won the Wisconsin State Senate seat in the 26th district. So she's coming from politics. We have Renee Moe from the nonprofit industry, who is president and CEO of United Way Dane County. And we have Michele Kaiser, who has worked her way very high up at John Deere. So I am very excited to be joined by this excellent, distinguished panel of women leaders. So the thing I really like about this panel today is that we have education, we have politics, we have nonprofit, and we have the for-profit industry. So it should be quite interesting to see their perspectives on this, since they all come from different domains of activities. Hopefully some come from where you come from, the participants, and maybe you come from even a different domain, and you'll have a great question for us to stretch all of our thinking into new ways. So something that'll be kind of interesting to see is, do we find that leadership really is the same regardless of industry or occupation, or are there nuances that maybe make an effective leader in the nonprofit world different from an effective leader in the profit world or in higher education or in politics? So that'll be something interesting to see as our discussion unfolds tonight. So let me take 10 minutes, maybe kick the ball off content-wise, and give you just a brief introduction about the study that we did. So Alex, who is a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I started studying this women's leadership in a crisis during COVID, and we published our findings in Journal of Applied Psychology. You might think it's interesting, some think it's somewhat controversial, so we'll see where you fall. So there's different perspectives on which leadership can be evaluated. One of those perspectives is gender effectiveness. So when Alex and I were thinking about this, we started to dig into the literature to say, is there evidence to suggest that women tend to be more effective leaders in a crisis? And we found that actually there is quite a bit of evidence showing this. So if you look at law, for example, there's research that shows female attorneys are more likely to be selected to litigate high-risk cases. If you look at political elections, there's research that shows women are disproportionately selected to contest hard-to-win seats. Research in business found that during the 2008 crisis, small businesses with CEOs who were females actually fared better during that crisis than organizations who had a male CEO. And then there's quite a few studies and meta-analyses that show the more women you have on a board of directors, it can be tied to stronger financial performance. So this is the background from where we were coming from when we started to look at the literature. And what we were interested in is, could it be that female governors are actually more effective than male governors during the COVID-19 crisis in terms of death counts? So we used publicly available data and we looked at this question. Now, before I go in and tell you a little bit more about the data, I'd like to just share briefly why we see this effect. Why do we see the female attorneys doing more high-risk cases or contesting the harder to win seats? Why do we think that female governors potentially might be more effective than male governors? Well, research shows that in a crisis, you need curvilinear thinking. You need to be able to think on your feet, to be flexible, to be creative. A crisis isn't something that a lot of us have much direct experience with. So there's not a lot we can draw from there. And both research in neuroscience and applied psychology show that women tend to show those qualities, those curvilinear thinking qualities, more so than men. So that's one reason. Another reason that women tend to be more effective in a crisis is they're better typically at fostering collaboration. So there's been a lot of research on leadership styles, and it's found that women tend to have a democratic leadership style. So they invite more voices to the table. They're more open to listening to diverse views. And so in that way, we come to the best consensus, a lot of times making the most effective decisions simply because we're more open to hearing input from others. Empathy was one that a lot of our participants here mentioned in the chat, and absolutely empathy is another area that research shows women tend to have more empathy than men. And there's empathy is sort of defined in two prongs in the research. And the first is, are you aware of the feelings of others? Do you acknowledge them? Do you understand them? But beyond feelings, are you also aware and do you show concern for the personal welfare of others? So it's both this feelings and concerns, and can you relate to that? And research suggests women tend to be more empathetic than men. And finally, confidence. Women tend to convey confidence differently than men. So men tend to convey confidence in a form of power, sort of asserting themselves, winning arguments. Women tend to convey confidence slightly differently with more sensitivity, more about the future. What does the future hold? And I'm confident that we can get there. One of the reasons that we observe this effect is that research suggests that when mistakes and failures happen, and in a crisis, mistakes are bound to happen, men tend to take them more personally. They make what we call an internal attribution. So if they make a mistake, they blame themselves, and it hurts their ego, right? And women more make external attributions, which allow them to bounce back faster when mistakes happen. So that's another potential reason that in a crisis, when we see the potential to make mistakes and make wrong decisions, women tend to get through that a little bit better than men. So that was the theory. Getting into the data, so what we did for this study is the New York Times had made available COVID-19 information as far as death counts by state. So we got the data from the publicly available source, and then we also looked at the National Governors Association. And from there, we were able to see what different states were doing in terms of face mask mandates, banning travel, issuing stay-at-home orders. And we combined that with census data. What this allowed us to do was test whether women are more effective in terms of less death count, but controlling for a lot of other variables. So one of the questions we see a lot of times, or if I read some of the comments in the media, people will be like, well, of course they found that, but what about this? What about this? So this is the what about part, right? So we controlled for state population, we controlled for political party, we controlled for governor's age, we controlled for their experience, we controlled for whether the state had issued a face mask mandate, we controlled for whether the state had issued travel bans, whether they had allowed their hospitals to participate in ventilator sharing, to control for hospital capacity. So we had all of these controls in there, which allowed us to isolate the effect of gender. And we did find that states with women governors were associated with fewer COVID-19 deaths. We also found an interaction effect, which is pretty interesting. So for the states that issued an early stay-at-home order, when that order was issued by a female governor, it appears that the residents responded more positively because we saw a lot lower death count in those states compared to states that also issued an early order, but it was issued by a male governor. So what this suggests is that residents perhaps volitionally complied to a greater extent with the female governors than the male governors. And you could say, okay, it's interesting. You found a set of relationships and that's interesting, but why? Why did these states have less? And so that gets to the study 2, which is where we actually pulled all of the governor briefings from April 1st to May 5th, because May 5th was our cutoff date for this study. And we analyzed the transcripts with a text analysis software to test for some of these reasons of why are we seeing differences. And what we found supported 2 of the reasons that I went over in the theory, and empathy, which was a reason here in the chat. So we did find that women governors showed significantly more empathy than the male governors. They did this by speaking more to their followers' feelings and concerns. And for example, there was a governor that said, I feel your pain. I'm going through the same pain. My family's going through it. Call me. Let's work through this together. So it was very much emphasis on the feelings of the followers. We also found that they spoke more about their followers' personal welfare by recognizing that people are concerned about their jobs. I mean, we've had the highest unemployment rates ever, and people are concerned about it. And with jobs, people are also concerned about money. And the women governors were speaking significantly more to these 2 really important issues than the male governors, showing that they, again, were just a little more dialed in and connected with the concerns and feelings of their followers. And then we also did find that the women governors showed more confidence in their briefings than the men. And this was through the different words that they were using. So taken together through this communication of empathy and confidence, we can surmise that the female governors probably got more volitional compliance, which ultimately led to that first finding, which is that states with female governors had lower death counts than states with male governors. So then you can say, well, what are the implications of this? Well, it might be easy to conclude that these are inborn differences, and it's really important to clarify that that's not necessarily what we're saying. We're not necessarily saying that women are born with these qualities that make them better, because actually most of our theory for this paper is based on social roles. So social roles is the mediator, which is the variable between gender and the outcome. And this is based on how we are raised, what we learn, and how we're socialized into society. So the implication is there's nothing really in our finding to suggest that men can't do these things, that men can't be more empathetic or more confident. And again, I want to also just clarify that in some instances, men might be more effective leaders. This was the context we were looking at was COVID-19 and how women did here. And in this context and setting, we found that women tended to be more effective. So there's nothing really to stop us from saying, well, maybe we need to develop a training program. Maybe we need to focus on leaders that show empathy and show confidence when we're trying to navigate a crisis. But importantly, I think it really boils down to building a culture of inclusion, making sure that different voices are heard, that different voices are invited to the table, but not just invited, that we do listen and we do hear them, that executive leadership teams have diverse views, that those leaders are empathetic and confident, especially now more than ever, and that confidence is communicated with sensitivity. So that's kind of the broad takeaway. I know that was pretty quick. I moved through that, but we'll have room for questions later. I do want to turn the floor over to our panelists because I'm really excited to hear about their experiences. So what I thought we would do is give each panelist a few minutes to tell us about their experience as a woman leader during the crisis. And then once we've heard from each of our panelists, we will turn the floor over to our attendees and invite questions to get into our interactive discussion. So I will go in order that the panelists were listed on the event webpage. So we will start with Dr. Victoria Palmisano.
Hi, thanks, Kayla. I'm glad to be a part of the panel. Yeah, so the crisis was something that we hadn't really seen before in an education setting. Having to move all of our content online very quickly is something that we've never experienced and never been asked to do. I think that part of it was being confident. And like you've said, that was a really big piece of moving everybody online quickly in a way that didn't cause chaos. I didn't want our students, and some of them are here today listening to this panel, I didn't want our students to feel like we didn't know what we were doing at any point. So it was important to me not only to listen to everyone who was part of our team, but also to listen to our students, to meet their needs, to make sure we were doing the best by them, but also being mindful of each person's knowledge and ability. So we came together as a team that was really important. I made sure to listen to everyone who's part of the faculty. Our entire group brings amazing strengths in different areas, and we were able to come together and leverage those strengths in a pretty amazing way. The piece that I think I was able to coordinate was pointing out each person's strengths to them and then asking them to work towards those strengths to support everyone else. So that was really the piece that I thought was important, is that team piece, the collaboration, and then making sure we were all feeling really confident about what we were doing, even though the decisions were coming quickly and probably faster than we would normally want to make a decision in education. They seemed to work out pretty well in that quick shift by just holding up everybody's strengths and reminding them that they were able to do it.
Excellent. Thanks, Victoria. I remember our staff meeting when you're like, there's a chance that things will be happening quickly and we might transition to online. And at that point, it was very early. And we were like, what? And then all of a sudden it was bam, and it was moving quick. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, let's go to Kelda.
Thank you. So when this current crisis started, I was not serving in public office. I was busy running my small business, and I have 2 young kids. And so the first thing on my mind is, school. Basically, we have to keep them home from school and daycare. And all of a sudden I'm working full time, trying to run a business and manage 2 children at home, which is a challenge for anyone who has kids or pets, I think. Just for the first few weeks, as I wrap my head around that, the seat that I now will be holding came open. The gentleman announced his retirement, and I didn't even have to hesitate for 1 minute. I knew I wanted to run. I've been so dismayed by the lack of leadership at the federal level regarding this crisis. And one of the things I know about myself is I definitely don't have all the answers to things, but I have a drive to learn and to find people who can help me make good decisions, can teach me things, and can point me to resources. And I think that that's really the most important thing. When you're serving in a political capacity, you're most often a generalist. There are a few policy areas that I feel like I know really, really well and could talk your ear off, but, I'm liable to get a question about, any of 200 issues. And so I think knowing that I would be able to find the people who could help me get up to speed and figure out what was needed at the state level and what was missing, gave me the confidence to just say, yes, I'm going to run. I'm going to take on this challenge, even though it seems like, everything in the world is coming to a head. We have multiple crises, not just COVID, but we have a racial justice crisis that's made, our existing inequalities even worse. We have climate change. And so those are a lot of big challenges that we face. And, I think the fact that I had served in public office before and that I, felt like I would be able to kind of just walk into the job on day one gave me the feeling that, yes, I can take this on, even though it means adding another huge layer of complexity to my life and to my family.
At a complex time, too. I mean, not just adding another life, but
to run for office. We need to knock on doors and see people.
Yeah, right. Excellent. Well, thank you for that overview. Let's go to Renee.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, great. I was having a hard time unmuting. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much, Kayla, for including me. I am in an unusual position in that we deal with crisis all the time. So I was struck by your comment around people not having experience with crisis. We do, experiences with people who are in crisis every day. And the pandemic just really exacerbated that crisis with exactly with what you were talking about, with loss of income, loss of job. And certainly we focus in on family stability. So when all of this happened in March, we had been talking to public health and the school systems to figure out that schools were going to be closing. And we quickly went to work getting our team online so they were able to work from home. And then our 211 call system, which is an information referral system, was really inundated right away with people calling and asking for food resources, rental assistance, and flexible funds for that gap between when benefits would kick in, as well as for folks who are undocumented who didn't have access to those resources. So, that was a huge spike in terms of listening to nonprofits, listening to families to see what they needed. We partnered with Boys and Girls Club and Selfless Ambition to raise over $2 million to very quickly help support those resources and services. And so that was a lot of work with the business community and very generous individuals who were able to help provide that resource ballast. And the mayor asked us to help coordinate a lot of the volunteerism that was going on in the community to really be able to help with all those people who wanted to help, but didn't necessarily know about safety protocols or connecting in with existing services. So you had a lot of neighborhood and Facebook kinds of groups popping up that we were helping to coordinate. So, the initial ability to just sort of say, okay, here's the crisis that's coming up and what do we do? We're really in existence to frame issues, mobilize resources, and be accountable for results. And so that perspective of, in this whole new normal where everything is virtual, how do we redesign the work that we do to make sure we can still lift up people who want to help and people who need help and make the bridge together to be accountable for, coming out of this stronger than ever. So that's a little bit about how that affected us. And I think my daughter's singing in the background, so I just realized is that noisy? I'm sorry. I sort of tuned it out, so hopefully that wasn't distracting.
No, all is good. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I think it's interesting your comment about dealing with crisis every day, because most of us don't, right? But you are in a unique position that you're coming from where you do have some of that experience to draw on as well. Okay, let's go to Michele.
All right. Hi. Thank you for having me, Kayla. I appreciate the opportunity. So I work for John Deere, as Kayla mentioned earlier, and my COVID story is really an interesting one. So I took my current position in March, and my first day in the new role was March 16th. And March 17th was the day that the governor shut everything down. And we were having to make a lot of decisions really fast in the workplace. So I work in an assembly operation in a manufacturing plant. So all of my employees were still required to be on site. However, there were many people that we decided to send home. So many people in our workplace have been working from home since March 17th. But coming into a new role in the middle of the COVID tornado and having to learn a new team and get to know a new team was really something I think I will never forget. And the pace of change was so fast because, as Kayla had mentioned earlier, it was just something we had never dealt with before. And we do have a playbook for crisis, and we do have a playbook for even what to do in a pandemic kind of thing. But until you're actually going through it, there are so many things that you just need to sort out as you go. So everything from, I remember one morning at 5:30, I'm out front with some caution tape trying to redirect employees so they don't come into contact with each other during shift change, and putting up plexiglass and break areas and removing chairs and figuring out how do we get sterilizing material to our assemblers so they can clean their tools, and how do we get face coverings to everyone, and what does a face covering even mean in the beginning? Is that a shield? Is that a mask? What is that? And then it got to the point where we were starting to 3D print some things, and we were just literally making things so that we could continue to proceed through that. So it's been an interesting evolution. And I think for me, just, I'm an input seeker. That's my strength. If any of you have done the Strength Finder analysis. So that helped me a ton in the beginning, because I just was all in for just help me understand and tell me what I need to know. And I think, as Dr. Palmisano was mentioning, figuring out who had what strengths and how to leverage that. So quickly I could figure out who to put where. And that was great. And then also just really strong communication. So I have a first shift and a third shift crew. And what I learned quickly is that my third shift crew, because they weren't there during the day for our incident response team meetings, they felt like they didn't always have the latest information, which would change 3 times during the day. So I started just keeping a twice daily log for them, and I would send them an email and kind of let them know what had happened, so that when they came in, they weren't surprised by, why is this new thing here? And, oh, that looks different. And so just working through all of those things. And I remember being relieved when the pace of change slowed, because we finally got to a point where things felt pretty stable. And but it was just so odd. And I remember trying to buy and sell a house during that time was really wacky. And then I was living in a hotel for the first 7 weeks of this thing, which on one hand was somewhat good because I was isolated somewhat. But then I would go home on the weekends, and I I wouldn't hug my husband. I wouldn't do anything until I had boiled myself in the shower, basically, you know, because we didn't know what we were dealing with. So that was just a really crazy time. I don't think I will ever forget that move, and probably the most memorable move of all of them that I've had.
Yeah, let's hope you don't top that.
Amen to that.
Yes. Excellent. Well, thank you all for the introduction into your world during this crisis. So what I'd like to do now is move into the interactive portion, because we have a great attendee list here. So for everybody that's listening, there's a Q&A box down. You should be able to see. There's also the chat. But if you want to use the Q&A and send us a question, and then I will pick the question, we'll put it out, and then the panelists can jump in sort of as you feel. So while you're thinking about the questions you want to ask, I already have a few from my class who's in attendance. So I will start with a couple of the questions we have in advance, but please do send us your questions while we do this. So the first question is, how do your other identities show up for you in leadership, and how do they inform how you lead as a woman? Maybe Renee, do you want to start with this one?
Sure, a faster space bar this time. That's good. So I think you're thinking about all identities. So my identities are as a woman, as a wife, as a mom, as an executive, as a woman of color, identify as Asian, and I think it's a change catalyst, right? That's very much what we do at United Way. So I think all of those identities really fit into a lot of the key skills that everyone else has mentioned before in terms of listening to diverse points of view. I think you kind of have that learned understanding that everybody lives different problems, so they can see different solutions. And when you listen to that, you can actually come out with better outcomes. And so, I think that's an important part of our leadership, which is really identifying who we are, where we stand, but also having that inclusion for all those other perspectives and points of view too.
Excellent. Michele, Kelda, or Victoria, do either of you want to jump in on this question as well?
I mean, I guess what I would add to that is, a couple of different identities come to play for me. So one is, of course, as a leader and just trying to be a servant leader. So figuring out if that's just getting some SteriFab wipes to my supervisor so they can get them somewhere, right? If I can do that. But then also being a really good bench player for our executive team. So what is it that they need me to execute every day? And so sometimes you're the coach and sometimes you're the teammate. And I think flexing between those two has been really critical to being successful during this time and really continuing to be agile as things have changed so quickly.
Excellent. It looks like we have a question from one of our attendees here. So Susan says, it isn't typical to correlate women leaders in confidence, which Michele, if you recall back to our OB class, we spent a whole day talking about confidence and gender, right? And how there is a gap in general, a gender gap where women actually are less confident overall than men. So Susan is saying, what do you think contributes to this level of confidence in a crisis? Why are we seeing women more confident in a crisis? So I will let the panelists take that first from your experience, and then I'll maybe add a few tidbits from the research. So Victoria, do you want to start with that one?
Sure. I'm from New Orleans, and I went through Hurricane Katrina and saw a lot of different leadership. And one of the things that I really remembered at the start of this COVID outbreak was that I wasn't happy with the female leaders that I had seen then. And I wanted to be a different leader than that. I saw a lot of female leaders at the time who were on national television crying. And while it came across as being very empathetic, it didn't seem very confident to me. And I didn't want to follow someone who wasn't sort of standing up for the better of the entire citizenry. So one of the pieces there that I really took from that and took it to heart was to show as much confidence as I could. And I have a great team, and I can be confident in my team. And I know that if I don't know the answer, I can just throw out the question to everyone and we'll work through it. And So I think that was part of it, really living through that experience, and then knowing that I had support made the confidence easy.
Kelda, did you have anything to add to that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think Kayla, since your recent research is really in a political context, I think that you know, we still have a huge disparity in the number of women in elected office at every level, but particularly women in executive positions. And if you look at the women who have achieved an executive political position, often, governors and mayors, these are really exceptional women. It's very, very hard. And there's a ton of research that shows that when women show competence, that they are seen as less likable. Whereas men, there's no disconnect. The more competent you are, you can be competent and likable, or competent and unlikable. But for women, that isn't the case. And so for the women who have successfully threaded that needle, I mean, I think, you're just talking about women who are really the cream of the crop, because you can be a totally average man and make it in politics or in any other field, but it's really hard for women, particularly in the executive role. And, I think that in general, women tend to be, very focused on solving the problem at hand. And when we're handling a crisis, whether it's, a crisis with a parent who, suddenly needs care, or a crisis in our community, I think a lot of the women I know who are kind of the leaders and who are just willing to step up are just saying, like, what can I do to solve this problem? And not really worrying about the optics or what this is going to do to my, my career path, or this thing that I've thought of down the road. And that kind of focus, I think, is really important in a crisis, and especially in a political context where every decision you make is going to be micromanaged, and in many contexts it's going to be fodder for a partisan fight, and you never want to give any ammunition to your political opponents. And I think that if you look at some of the women governors, they just sort of were plowing ahead and saying, well, this is what the science says, I'm going to do the right thing, and let the chips fall where they may.
Absolutely. It's interesting too, the point you bring about the competence and sort of that idea of role incongruity. We know the research shows it both ways. So when women act in a sense that we attribute more towards male, they get harmed, but discounted for that, right? And when men act more feminine, they also get discounted for it, because we have these ideas about what a role should be, and when people act incongruent with it, unfortunately, consciously or subconsciously, that happens. So we've been getting a lot of great questions here. So I will put out the next one, which is, what do you do to combat the fatigue that has set in now that we've been living with COVID for 6 months? How do you keep your energy up and be a confident leader every day? Any one of you can jump in on this.
I'll jump in and say that I work with a great group of leaders at the college, and my supervisor actually started saying we needed to do a better job of overcoming COVID fatigue, because we have to keep moving forward. There's opportunity for change and betterment, and if we just sit back and say, we'll worry about that when COVID's over, then we won't get anything done. So I think that keeping that in mind, that we were planning things, we were doing things, we all had great ideas that we wanted to put into place before everyone got sent home. And we can still do those things. We just have to think about enacting and enabling differently. So I think the implementation process is something that we'll have to work through, and it's all about learning new methods, but we have to keep moving forward, because if we don't, then we're not making things better, and we're not moving forward.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think one of the things that I have noticed, well, I guess two things. One is, go find your corner in which you can scream, and you'll have someone like screaming back at you and laughing, and, or find your person you need to drink some wine with. That helps a lot. But really, we're trying to focus on, there's a lot of good that has come out of this. So we're saving a ton of money on travel, and it doesn't mean that we're going to stop traveling, but it does mean we're going to be smarter about looking at those kind of things. We're turning our cameras on now on meetings, and we didn't do that before. You know, even with our remote colleagues, we would just do that over the phone and not turn on our cameras. So we have found unique ways to connect. We have found interesting and different ways to run our business. And I think, you know, what we're all very sort of scientifically curious about now is what are the things that we are going to be doing smarter instead of harder as we move forward. And you know, it actually, as Victoria was talking there, it spurred a thought going back to Susan's question. You know, in the beginning, I think the confidence comes across because women are just good at, you know, we struggle when we overthink things, right? And in a crisis, you just don't have time to overthink. And so then all of these other attributes come into play. You're empathetic and you're communicating and you're doing all of these things that, you know, now suddenly you're looking super confident because you're driving change and you don't have time to overthink it. So I'm curious, Kayla, this is a challenge back to you and Alex. I'm wondering, when we think about COVID fatigue, does that curve flatten out? And do the men and women, you know, does that become a little bit more asymptotic where we see the female leadership advantage somewhat diminish there?
You know, I haven't seen any research on that. It's an interesting question. And the whole thing with COVID, it is so new. And as you know, from reading all the research articles, research typically takes 2 to 3 years to get published, but these journals are trying to push things through faster. So it's a great question. Unfortunately, I don't have a real good answer. We did a survey of about 500 teleworkers, and we did find that women were feeling less lonely and less isolated than men, which is pretty interesting. And we dug into that a little, and research does show that men tend to report higher levels of social and professional isolation, which potentially could mean they're feeling more fatigued than the women. But again, that's early research by the survey that we did. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Kelda.
I was just going to say, you know, along those same lines, I mean, I think a lot about how devastating this crisis is for most women. You know, women are across the board, you know, having to step back from their work responsibilities at all levels, from low-income workers to sort of white-collar professional workers, because all the burdens of caregiving are falling on us, and the increased household responsibilities, you know, tend to, in many cases, fall on women. And, you know, so it's very interesting. There's this paradox where, like, women at the top and women leaders are in a way thriving because they have this opportunity to shine in leading through this crisis. But I think for, you know, there's going to be a generational setback in terms of gender equality across workplaces in our society. And that concerns me a lot. Sorry to be a Debbie Downer.
I think downer in reality. I think that you know, you always have to kind of balance that. You know, I tend to be more along the lines of Victoria, which is, you know, you got to keep going, and that's you know, our job. And I really got some feedback from one of my team members, also a woman, who said, you know, you need to really actually pause and engage in with that fear and engage with the feeling of being overwhelmed. You know, and I got a lot of questions about compassion fatigue as well, because so many people were being asked to help and to do good. And here we are, you know, in the middle of For United Way, which is a fall campaign that funds nonprofit budgets in 2021, which is particularly critical this year because so many of them can't do their own fundraisers. And so, you know, I think that the part of the fatigue that is energizing, if that makes sense, is to just be honest about it. You know, there was a time, I remember a day where I was on a call and I was just like, I am just, you know, through the crush of doing all the innovation and, you know, managing everything and changing everything. And, you know, you mentioned that, Michele, and to talk specifically around, you know, just start for that moment of pause. But then you've got to find those ways to get re-energized again, because, you know, we got to keep going, and we also have to be aware of, you know, burnout. And I'm lucky I have a lot of energy, and not everybody else can sustain that energy. So you have to really tune into the energy around you and try to to figure out, what is that sense of togetherness and belonging and drive and change that keeps people moving forward together.
Great, thank you. So we will shift to the next question, and that is, do you deal with imposter syndrome? And if so, how does that impact your leadership style? And if anyone wants to answer that one.
All day, every day? I don't know. I would say though, it gets easier, as you get more experience. So to whomever asked that question, if this is something you're struggling with, I do find that it starts to get a little bit easier. And I think especially as you lean into your strengths, that's when it gets incredibly easy. But, I still honestly fight through that every day. And I try not to let that cloud what I'm doing. So I just try to remember to center myself around, okay, what does my team need? And I know that I'm going to be there for my team and I'm going to deliver what the team needs. And if I stay really focused on that, it wipes the rest of the way.
Okay, so next question related to COVID fatigue. I'm hearing so much demand for coming together in person. How have you helped to provide empathy to have people embrace all of the opportunity that virtual presents?
Our students really wanted to come back, and that was one of the things that we were challenged with this summer, is figuring out how to balance faculty who maybe didn't necessarily want to be in the classroom for various reasons, for health concerns, but then also allowing students to come and be part of the student experience. And on top of that, realizing that some students wouldn't want to be in the classroom either. We do have some students who have concerns for their health and their families, and trying to figure out a way that we could still feel like one unit was really hard. I'm teaching too, along with my administrative work, and being able to navigate a classroom situation that allows all of the students to feel connected is a huge learning curve. WebEx helps and video, but I think I feel like I'm reaching out a lot more to individuals to say, how are you doing? How's it going? Are you feeling okay with this? And maybe we're having to make a little more adjustments and be a bit more flexible for each other. Even some of the classes, I had a couple of students who really wanted to come in class, but we were having some audio issues in doing that, and having a talk with everybody and saying, maybe it's for the best of the group if we all just join each other at the same time on WebEx, because we're in the same space and it allows us to communicate better. I know that I'm not really meeting all of the needs of all of my students at all the time, but in having to try to do the best we can to give everybody a fair chance and an even experience. And so it's been a lot more difficult. And then also not being able to sit in a meeting with my colleagues is tough too. Laura and I used to have weekly meetings in the same room, and now we're trying to do the same work virtually, and the technology is not perfect and it's hard.
Yeah, I would just add to that. We've done a couple of different things for our employees who are working from home. So those of us who are still in the factory, once a week, we'll have a virtual social happy hour on Thursdays at 4. So anybody that wants to join that can. And that's been really fun. And it was kind of nice as a person that was new to the role too, to get to know some people. So that was just great. And it kind of gave people a chance to bond over whether it was trivia or name that tune or whatever we were playing that week. It was a really good time. And then a lot of managers have set up virtual team lunches. So everyone just calls in and turns on their video and hangs out and talks about whatever. So we really tried to create that social experience that you have from just going over and chatting at your colleague's desk or having lunch with someone. We try to do that now through video chat. And we've also had different things like all employee meetings or panel discussions such as this, and we have certainly tried to do a good job at recording those things so that that link is then available to anyone afterwards, but they can still feel like they're seeing and interacting with folks. And we by no means have all the answers, so I'm open to any suggestions anyone has in this space, but those are just a couple things that have worked for us.
That's great. I'll say, for us, a big part of our coming together is in events. And so, for example, one of our events, we have literally hundreds of community members who come together and volunteer on site on a day. And of course, that wasn't possible. And so just thinking differently around with public health guidelines, CDC guidelines, how do you do some of that engagement that is safer, not promising safety, but safer. And it's actually been quite successful. We've also moved a lot of our events to webinar types of experiences, and using chat rooms and other fun, getting to know you, the poll that you use, for example, right, just making that more innovative and fun, a little stickier for folks. It has been a really big success. And one consequence that I wasn't expecting is our full staff meetings, I think, are even more effective now than they ever have been in the past, because there's more planning ahead. You were really being more strategic about what gets discussed and how to make that more engaging, and that attention to engagement has helped a lot. So I think the empathy for folks who are feeling really disconnected, there's an opportunity to say, we can still connect, right? We're not socially distancing, we're physically distancing, and how do you help have that human experience is something that we can build in. And I'll just add too, on our website, under the campaign tools tab of our United Way site, there are actually a lot of fun things to do that companies have asked for to help their employees have fun together. And there are things that, that were just mentioned, but also sharing your pets, sharing your photos, giving tours of your home, little fun things like that. And some places are even doing talent shows. So really trying to use the human experience through our virtual medium to keep those teams strong, keep those connections strong.
Renee, I just wanted to say quick, I love what you said about we're not socially distancing, we're physically distancing. I'm going to use that at work tomorrow. So thank you for bringing that to my life.
You're welcome. It didn't come up, so thank you.
I was going to say the same thing, Michele, that we're not socially distancing, we're physically distancing. That's a great way to look at it. Absolutely. So we'll go to our next question from Lisa. So Lisa says, in organizations where men are predominantly in a leadership position, I found that women leaders can experience some judgment and negative reactions from male leadership around expressing emotions and fears. Has anyone else experienced this specifically, perhaps in the early point of the pandemic, and how do you respond or deal with it?
And I guess I'll take this one. So I work in a large corporation, and we have lots of dudes we work with, but lots of ladies too. And I would say the thing that I always think about sort of displaying the emotions and the fears is there's sort of a fine line, right, between vulnerability and being viewed as just emotional and dramatic. So I think, behind a closed door, I've got a lot of male colleagues that I can be really real with in terms of being kind of emotional or admit that I'm scared or admit that I don't know what to do. But when I'm in front of a large team, I need to be vulnerable, but I also need to let them know that it's going to be okay. And I'm going to get them through this, and we're going to get through this together. So I think there's a way to be vulnerable through this empathy and authenticity we've talked about. And kind of you don't want to be sort of crying in a mess in front of your large team, because they will take their cue from you, and you don't want that. So you kind of want to keep that to your inner circle, to just let that out, vent that out. And I've never had a male colleague who has sort of held any judgment against me for that, which has been great. I've been really lucky in that way. And I'm sort of an emotions on my sleeve kind of person. So it's always good to know that I'm not being judged for that. But in front of a large team, certainly you want to lock that down a little bit, but still be vulnerable. It's a fine line. It's hard.
Yeah, one of the challenges about being a leader or being in the public eye, I think, is feeling like you really have to keep emotions in check and always be projecting the image that you want people to take away. And I think that's actually one of the biggest shifts that I've seen in politics, since I first ran for office for state assembly like 12 years ago. And I really felt like I had to always be the best, most polished professional version of myself. Everything from how I dressed when I would knock on doors that, men didn't have to worry about, until now, when I think this is a moment where we're all kind of experiencing this collective upheaval and trauma. And, there has been a move towards more authenticity and showing a little bit more of yourself and kind of expanding the idea of what it means and what it looks like to be a leader or a woman in politics. And I think that's really good, because we're never going to have parity in leadership if there's only one model, one narrow version of what a woman leader looks like. And so, when I ran for governor, I campaigned with my baby, and I brought my baby with me everywhere, and, definitely got some negativity, but I think I got a lot of positivity, even from, corners I would not expect, like, old, like retired farmers in conservative parts of the state, and men, and I think in this pandemic, that's actually been kind of a plus, is being able to talk about my fears, like, what is this going to do to my kids? And also acknowledging that I come from a hugely privileged position, because my kids will probably be fine no matter what. We have the resources, and, I have a parenting partner, and we're both able to work from home. But just being able to express that and know that, people are losing their businesses. They're afraid of losing their housing. And so part of being a leader is being able to be honest about your own fears, and that will help you connect with people and help them see me as not just, someone sort of yelling in the wind about what should happen, but someone who's living through this too. I mean, as we all are. Being able to show that you're, having something nice on the top, but you're wearing leggings and are barefoot, which I am.
Which gets to that building connection, right, with people, acknowledge. And that's what some of the governors in our study did too, is, we're going through the same things you're going through, and emphasizing that. I think I was having a conversation with a woman yesterday who said, the interesting thing about this is that you're dealing with children being at home, your bosses, it doesn't matter what your position is, everyone is dealing with a lot of these very same challenges that have almost equalized things in the sense of the challenges that we're all facing. So being able to relate to people, I think, can be really powerful, versus acting like you always have everything together, which you can hear my crying baby. So I don't over here. So
Hashtag real life. You're doing great. I want to pop in there.
Hi, Renee.
I do think that you're right. This is a shared experience, which really increases authenticity, humanity. And I think there's also the awareness of the disproportionate impact on so many people, and you both talked about that. Who gets sick, who dies, who gets to recover, how quickly. Those are all things that have disproportionate impact, in particular for people in poverty and people of color. And so I think that for all of us to really be honed in on humanity right now, and that shared experience is a huge opportunity for us, because there's so much innovation that must happen. I mean, technology alone creates that, but not only technology, post-pandemic, industry shifts, economic changes. And so as all of us are looking at these institutions who have been around and that were baked in the 50s and 60s, and transform higher education and business and nonprofits and everything else, schools. It's a time for us to really think about that shared humanity and how we can move that all forward together. So I just didn't want to let that moment pass.
I think that segues really nicely to a question that one of my students had submitted, which is, how do you balance the need to reopen the organization that you're leading with the knowledge that the systemic health inequities have placed people of color at an increased risk of getting sick and dying, and also understanding the discrimination many people of color in the United States have directly experienced wearing a mask during this pandemic? So how do you balance those things?
So we have a saying at work that we want to be the second safest place that anyone can be at any given time. And the reason we say that is because we believe at home is your safest place. So everything we're doing every day by keeping people physically distanced, making sure people are wearing face coverings, all of these things is because we know that those things exist. And I was just talking to an African-American colleague of mine today, and we were talking about how, I haven't seen my family since Thanksgiving, and he is not able to see his family. And he said, it's really all about the underlying conditions in my family. And so we just had to talk about that, about how he feels a lot of pressure to stay healthy and not leave his home except to come to work. And it just really drove home for me, again, the need that I have to keep him safe, and make sure that not only, of course, he's doing all the right things, right, but I've got to make sure that we in the facility are doing all the right things to do that. So that problem is really real, but we kind of take that on as we are going to be the second safest place that any of our employees can be.
Kayla, I don't see the question in the chat. Can you say it again?
Yep, this was one that I had received in advance from a student. So it's not in the chat. It was, how do you balance the need to reopen the organization you're leading with the knowledge that systemic health inequities have placed people of color at an increased risk of getting sick and dying from COVID, and understanding the discrimination that many people of color in the US are experiencing from having to wear a mask in the pandemic?
Yeah, thank you. So I'll jump in if that's okay. So I think that, for our organization and for certainly the nonprofits, we're trying to help be as flexible as possible, right? So working wherever you feel the safest for as long as you can, providing the tools to make sure that you're able to do your jobs and have the support and feel the connection in whatever ways are safest. And I think that, these are also touchy HR issues because you don't necessarily want to disclose all those things to your employer, but there's got to be a safe space with HR or insurance or other benefits. And so just really trying to make sure that, that staff and others have that support and have a place to really express or not express, but also get what you need, even if you don't want to express it. So I think that just knowing that it is real and knowing that there are disproportionate impacts and understanding the stress in particular right now in this moment where there's so much unrest around race and racism and so much learning about how to be anti-racist, that it's really a moment in time just to tune in and ask people what they need and make sure that you're responsive in that environment.
Thanks, Renee. So we have quite a few questions, and I know we only have about a little over 20 minutes. So I'm going to move to the next one from Joni. So Joni says, what things are you doing to foster the growth of future women leaders during the pandemic?
So I think this is one that in my organization is probably a little bit easier because we have so many badass women, right, that I get to work with. So that's kind of fun. But one of our local leaders in the Waterloo area, she recently got a new female manager, and everybody was asking her like, oh, is that going to be hard, and all these stupid questions that she never would have gotten if she were a man. But anyways, she said, you know what? She's like, you think that two women arguing is powerful. Let me show you two women aligned. And I just thought, you know what? Yes. And so that has been kind of my mission as well, as I get to work with all of these amazing women in our operations, and really trying to make sure, a lot of the things that Renee was saying, like reach out and check in with them and see how they're doing and see how you can support them. And a lot of them may have questions that they don't want to ask in large groups. And so try to, be that person that can answer their questions, and mentorship is still great. I'm actually mentoring a lady in Brazil in our Brazil operations. And we do that over video chat, and it's always a fun discussion and I learn a ton from her. And so, just look for those opportunities, but yeah, let's see a couple of women aligned, and that's a powerful force.
I'll add too, there's so much opportunity right now to do something new and different, right? There's so much innovation that has to happen. And so I think another thing as a leader is just to identify, who's hungry, who's interested, who wants to do more, or who do you see that potential in, who's fearful of doing more. Give them the opportunities to succeed and learn, and try some things, and if it doesn't work, to take that forward. So I think there are a lot of opportunities right now. There's certainly more than enough to do, and so to give people chances to do new things is a great way to stretch skills and to build leadership.
Victoria, do you want to speak to this one from a sense too, like there's not always room for formally going into leadership, right? And we do see a lot of men in leadership positions in higher education. So what do you do from the domain that you come from?
One of the things that I was really mindful of when I took the position here at Edgewood was trying to promote more women in business. I have been told most of my adult life that men run businesses, and I've been trying to break through that and bring other women with me who feel the same way. And so one of the commitments that I've tried to make here at Edgewood is to put strong women into our classrooms, where I can find a woman to teach an area that we wouldn't normally see women, maybe a finance instructor or an accounting instructor. Those are typically male-dominated fields. The leaders are usually men. But I'll make the extra effort to find a woman to be in those places so that our female students can see a strong woman teaching them. I get asked a lot by high school students if female high school students will sit in my office and say, "Can I major in finance because I'm female?" And it's sort of heartbreaking to think that they don't see themselves in that role. So where I can be supportive, events like this I was really excited when you told me about the research and thought this is a great opportunity for us to show all of our female students that we can be researchers, we can be leaders, and we can do really great things without having to, play second fiddle. So I think that's been one of the big pieces, is trying to promote the fact that we're just as good, if not better, in a lot of these areas.
Anything to add there, Kelda? Okay. So I'm going to pair these next two questions together because I think they go together. So Jacob says, might you address male allyship in your work environment? What would you like to see more of from your male colleagues? Where do we fall short and what should we change? And Emma also said, how can the men in our lives better support us as emerging and established leaders? And I think if each of the panelists could touch on this, since you're all coming from a slightly different angle, that could be helpful.
Well, I definitely have a big soapbox to get on about this. I think in the political world, oftentimes there are gatekeepers before you run for office, or if you're going to be successful in politics. And it's really, really important that men go out and recruit women to run for office and support them and fund them. And women are always going to feel like they don't know enough or don't have enough experience or the right kind of experience to run for office. There's, copious research on this, but it's just not true. I mean, anybody who's thinking like, hey, I might like to run for office one day, but I'm not sure if I'm qualified. I invite you to come down to the Senate when it's back open and listen for like half an hour. And you will walk away saying, yep, I can do that. I'm good enough. I'm smart enough. I'm ready to be in the Senate. I think we have to do that, and especially the men who move a lot of money and influence. But in all areas of life, the most important thing that men can and should do is to step up at home. If you are a woman who is partnered with a man, then chances are that man, as good as he might be, is not doing his fair share, not doing as many of the things that you are doing. And I don't think there's anything more devastating to women's equality than the second shift that women are still bearing at home. I mean, all of the, the emotional labor that women do, not to mention just the invisible workload of managing all these things in our head. So I mean, men, if you actually really believe in equality, start at home, start with your partners, and, let's raise our sons to be doing chores just like we're having our daughters do. And let's raise our daughters to demand more than we are demanding for ourselves and then our mothers demanded. Okay, rant over.
No, that was excellent. Absolutely. I like the line, especially if you believe in equality, to start at home, because it's something everybody can do, right? Sometimes I think the mounting weight of change and how to go about change, and in the workplace, it can be so difficult to figure out where to start, who to start with. So I really like, Kelda, your point about start at home. It's something we can all do tomorrow when we wake up, or tonight. So that was a great piece of advice. Renee, do you want to go next?
Okay, got it. I must have a sticky space bar today. No, and I agree, starting at home is so important. And I think that this is really the larger conversation we're having, and we touched on it a little bit about authenticity and inclusion. And I think that, seeing people for who they are and who they can be and not making assumptions is really a huge thing that men can do, because we do have these ideas of the gender roles and, who can be successful and who can lead. And I think that more and more we're getting to that space where we're looking at, how we can be supportive. So, like echo everything Kelda's talking about. I work with a lot of men, particularly in our donor community and volunteer community. And I think for especially business leaders, there is an amazing raised consciousness right now of seeing effectiveness that looks really different from how it looked before. And it comes in all, shapes, sizes, colors. And, I think that from the perspective of just really understanding, objectivity in terms of roles, like what needs to happen, who can do it, how does it get done, and then to coach and mentor and help make sure that we're sharing, learning, and really being very generous in terms of helping everybody be successful. And that includes not predetermining who can be successful and who can't.
Michele?
Yeah, so I love what was said about starting at home. I was actually going to touch on that. So from the personal side, I think, I have a great support at home, and my husband takes up the lion's share of the work at home, and I feel very guilty about that many times. But he does a wonderful job, and he's working a full-time job from home as well. So I think that is really important. And then even, if I think to kind of broader than that, right? The broader network of outside of work, it's my dad, it's my uncle, it's my brother, it's all of these guys that my entire life have believed in me and challenged me and told me I could be anything that I wanted to be. And it kind of treated me as equal in terms of that. So that's been really great. So, men pay attention to that. And then inside of the workplace too, I think, being someone's ally can be, that might be, maybe you're the sounding board for that person, or maybe it's in a meeting. If you say, hey, I'd like to hear what Kayla has to think. Kayla, would you share your thoughts on this? Right. So be that guy. That's always nice. And then just, try to put aside these ideas of who you think should be in a role or what, and kind of just, think about, again, what are the strengths of that person and how do you help bring out and highlight and amplify that person's strength. So behind every great leader is sort of this village that helped them get there. So be a part of someone's village, whether that's in your community, in your home, mentoring someone, or inside of the workplace. Be a part of someone's village.
And I would just add to that, even if you are a leader yourself, right? So if you're a male leader or a woman leader, I think supporting other aspiring leaders and not just keeping the sole focus on you. A lot of times it's easy, especially as you rise up the ranks and you do become more important, and there are a lot of people counting on you in many different ways. It's easy to forget that there may be people that need your support too, as much as you need support from others. So I think that was a great point, Michele. Victoria?
So, I guess I get to be the one who is the leader at the organization that was found really strong women. So, in some ways I feel like women leadership in this space at Edgewood is natural, because that's where we came from. And so in a lot of ways, I feel like it's sort of my job to make sure that the women around me feel like they're cared for and acknowledged and are given enough opportunity to do things that they want to do and further their own careers. So in a lot of ways, I have to be extra mindful of that. And I'm really lucky in that I do have a lot of supportive male colleagues across the college who are also mindful of the fact that even though maybe we have the same credentials or somebody has higher credentials than someone else, it's more difficult as a female to speak out in the group and harder to maybe stand up and volunteer for things when your male colleagues are dominating the conversation. And so I think a lot of times it's really just stopping and thinking and looking around the room and realizing that everybody has this amazing voice and something wonderful to contribute, and giving them the space and encouraging them to do that is really important. And so that's where I think that in some ways I wish some of our male colleagues would stop and say, wait a second, we've volunteered enough, or we've had enough opportunity. Let's let the women do it for a little while. But, for the most part, I feel like, the history of Edgewood is sort of being supportive of women. And so it's a nice piece of being able to work here is that there's the joy in it of I'm part of that piece of history.
Can I just have like one quick last word on this? The other thing is, I think, we so often look at these problems as like individual problems, or it's a problem in a company or a family, but society is set up in a way to disempower women and to empower men. I mean, patriarchy is the air that we breathe. So the other really important thing you need to do is vote. And you need to vote for candidates and demand that they pass paid family leave and affordable childcare and strong pay equity laws, and things like address the student loan debt crisis that disproportionately affect women. If we want to have an equal society, the men have to care about these issues and vote like it too in November or before.
Absolutely. Well, and this really goes to the next question that I was going to move into, which came from a student. So it's not in the chat. It's from one of the students in my class. They said, so if women are successful in leading during times of crisis, which our research shows, and there's other research that shows this as well, why haven't organizations built a way to lean on women during these key leadership times? I'm curious what your thoughts are on this. If your organization's doing it, maybe how they're doing it, or why you think maybe they're not. Or if you want to approach it more broadly without getting into the specifics of your organization, that's fine too.
I think people don't know. I mean, I think that, it's not like, the research and the studies, I know they're out there, right? But I don't know that people are necessarily building that into the day-to-day of organizational design and, what it takes to really manage successfully. Most people are dealing with, the thing right in front of them and the strategy right in front of them. And so I think that, really healthy human resources, organizational design, to really understand, what is the structure that supports the strategy. You need to have a clear definition of your strategy. And you need to have some skills and some resource capacity to be able to think about talent development and management. And, and there's so little of that right now across organizations. Most companies aren't able to invest that much in terms of that, that talent management. So I think that, the awareness that you're bringing in terms of what it takes to build competence, in crisis, and also, that really beautifully stated statement at the beginning around this isn't just a gender thing, right? These are learned and coachable kinds of skills. So I think that the more effective leadership we have, the more effective management we have, it's really about transferring knowledge and getting those individuals to coach others and help lift everybody up and make everybody more successful. So I think the more that's known, the more that's practiced, the more that will happen.
That was an excellent summary, Renee. I don't know if anyone has anything to add to that, but that was very well put. I think awareness is key, right? So we teach a model of self-regulation, which is about individual behavior change, but collective behavior change is just a bunch of individual behavior changes occurring at the same time. And self-awareness is the first step, right? Before anything can change, awareness is the first step. The second step, though, is self-reflection. right? So it's one thing to be aware. It's one thing to say, okay, I'm going to take this seminar, this panel today, and I'm going to listen to these views, and I'm going to become more aware of the issues. That's only the first step. If you don't then reflect on what does that mean for me, your behavior won't change, right? So in the classes I teach, we use a lot of self-assessment scales. If you think of this as the assessment, I'm learning about the research. If it stops there, it's really not enough. And so reflect on what does it mean for me, whether I'm a male or a female listening to this session. I would encourage you to take a few minutes when it ends and think, what does this all mean to me? You know, we've heard a lot of information. How can I apply it, or how can it apply to the people in my life, and reflect on it. And after reflecting on it is when we get to the step that we call self-regulation, which is then where we can start to act on those things and start to enact change. So I echo Renee's points about awareness. I would add the reflection so that we start to see the change. Anyone else, anything to add on this point?
I actually think that women are often tasked with handling situations in a crisis, because that's the slog. I mean, that's like the hard work, the junk work that people don't want to do. But what I think is really different and really exciting about your research is that I think women are starting to get the credit for doing that. You look at companies that are in crisis. Well, that's often, when they'll put a CEO in, or they'll put a CEO in who's a woman after somebody has left for a long time. That's not a plum job. That's a really hard, awful situation to be put in. So I think, women have definitely been handling these crises for a long time, but often behind the scenes, and often with only getting criticism and not credit for actually how challenging they're able to manage it.
Yeah, and if I could add to that too, I think it's part of, we have to be willing to address the systemic things. So especially inside of a big organization, and whether that's increased, more diversity in these types of roles, or women in these types of roles, you have to figure out what the systemic things are that are preventing that from happening. And within our organization, we have an employee resource group, Women in Operations. And that was sort of a bottom-up grassroots effort when it started, that became then top-down supported from the leadership. And it started looking at things like new moms rooms. How do we make that better? How do we better deal with flexible work arrangements so that people don't have to be in here at 6 a.m. if they can't on a certain day? How do we job share? How do we tackle some of those things that are truly systemic, specific to women being in operations? And I think those are the things that, again, maybe we want more people of color, maybe we want more younger or older colleagues, and we got to look at what those things are. And that's how we will begin to address that.
So with just a couple minutes left, I would open it to closing remarks. Maybe if you were to boil it down, we've talked about a lot of really great issues. I would say our research really comes down to empathy and confidence seem to really make a difference for leadership in a crisis. So if you were to go tomorrow and say, I'm going to try to do something different, I would say try to listen to the feelings of your people and acknowledge them in a genuine way, and show them that we will get through this, that there is a brighter future ahead. So those would be what I would boil down to from my angle of research. So I'll let each of the panel maybe boil it down to a few things for our listeners before we close. We can go in the same order we opened in. Victoria, if you would like to start.
Sure. I would just say that, be mindful of your team and use them as a support, but then also support their strengths and let everybody do the thing they know they can do. And then the whole group will flourish from it.
Yeah, I would say don't be afraid to take risks. There's always going to be a segment of haters out there. You just, haters are going to hate. Don't worry about them. Worry about focusing on what you can control, and be willing to take that leap and do something that's scary and hard, because people will recognize it, they will see it, and they'll admire it, and you'll probably be put in another position where you'll have the opportunity to shine.
Am I next? Okay. I couldn't remember the order we started in. So I would say, that whole feeling of being authentic, I was struck by the imposter theory question. So many people are working so hard to be something, be somebody else. And I think that ability to be self-aware of what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, and being honest about that, that is the way to continue to contribute and grow. And a lot of times when I talk to groups like this about leadership, there's so much self-doubt and so much worry and so much nervousness about just starting. So I would say just start. We have a family motto that's onward, upward, awkward, and keep going, keep getting better, and it's going to be weird. It's going to be uncomfortable. And if you're not uncomfortable, you're not growing. So that would be my concluding remark.
Yeah, thanks. So I would just want to echo the authenticity piece. I think that for me is the most important. And when I was first going through this COVID experience and the pace of change was so fast, and I was trying to learn a new team and buy a house and sell a house and move and all of that crazy, it really came down to just leaning into my strengths and communicating openly, being vulnerable with my team, and just kind of doing what you can to jump in. So I think, don't let any of that stuff stop you. But I remember my mentor at the time, I was telling him like, oh, so-and-so is just doing such a great job, a colleague of mine in another factory. And I said, man, she's just crushing it on this thing. And he's like, nothing's stopping you from doing that. And I was like, oh, it was such an obvious comment, but it was so true. So I was like, yes, I'm going to go be great. So I think, to Renee's point, yeah, just go start, just go be great. If you heard something here today, take it, run with it, but just go be great.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank everyone that's here for attending. I want to thank our panelists for joining us tonight. And I want to thank Edgewood College for hosting this event. I hope that you got something out of it. Take some time, reflect on it, and maybe we'll see you again for a similar event in the future. So thank you so much.
Thank you.